We had this whole situation come up where like SSMS 21 is now SSMS 22, and now there's a whole new GitHub Copilot thing here in the mix. Well, it's got to be a different experience than what we had before. Is it or is it not? We'll compare the current GitHub Copilot experience to the previous OpenAI experience on today's chapter of DataBard. DataBard, 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 DataBard. Dabba, 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 hoi, hoi, hoi. Hey everybody, I'm DataBard, trying to help you take the next step on your data journey by helping you with tools and tips that'll help you be more efficient in the work that you do. This only helps though if the community knows. So, if you find this video genuinely helpful, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel so the YouTube algorithms and other people in the community will know that this sort of video is here to help for the community. Let's jump right into the demo. Let's set up the scenario we're talking about here. I've done a number of tests for being able to replicate ETL patterns utilizing SSMS Copilot. I want to try and see if I can get the same experience out of GitHub Copilot, different LLM experience, and presumably some different RAG things happening there. And I want to compare that to what I was able to do with SSMS Copilot before, which was using Azure OpenAI as the LLM solution. Let's take a look at this and see if it works. A bit of context to help explain what's going on. If I go into my DBO schema, I've got a table, invoices. This table has no ETL process or final fact tables to represent this transactional financial invoice data. So I want to create the entire ETL process, which includes a stored procedure and also includes the tables necessary. Let's start with this prompt that I have engineered pretty significantly with SSMS Copilot, and let's see how this works with this solution here. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off, and then let's take a look at the prompt as it runs. So I want to take a look at employee data. Here I'm defining what is the context that I'm giving it initially. Loads data in from DBO employees to... This isn't going to work because I don't have a query. Now let's go ahead and get ourselves started by starting up a new query window, as the query window is necessary to give the Copilot context into our database. And I'm going to go ahead and kick off this prompt, and then let's talk about it. In my prompt, I'm giving it a couple pieces of information. Here, I'm giving it this is generally what I'm talking about here, employee data. And generally I'm talking about the fact that data gets loaded from DBO employees to a staging table, and then finally into DIM employees. I want to create a new set of tables to support loading invoice data from invoices into staging invoices and then into fact invoices. At this point, I just want to create the tables. I'm hoping with creating the tables, the stored procedure will have an easier time getting created. So check if the tables exist, which they don't, but check, and if they don't, provide queries to create the tables. Use only the tables listed in this prompt as an example. I intentionally put this in after doing some testing prior to recording this video, because without this in place, the copilots had a tendency to look at other objects in the database to try and define what needs to happen here, and it was pulling up some things that I didn't want it to pull up. We need to add in surrogate key. Fact tables, admittedly that's arguable. If the DBO table has columns with foreign key relationships, replace the ID in the column name with a key, translating from natural key to surrogate, and assume that the lookup operation will happen in stage. Alright, as we've been talking about it, the prompt completed. Let's take a look at what it gave us. Breathe in, breathe out. Here is below is a ready to run T-SQL script that you can copy into SSMS. It checks for the stage invoices and fact invoices tables and creates the staging tables. And then it gives us this lovely script here. We'll go ahead and we'll copy it into the main chat window here. So it looks like I can either do copy code block or apply. Let's take a look at apply. Ooh, this is interesting. So notice here, first of all, the text is primarily green, but also at the top I have tap to accept, alt delete to discard. So it looks like what it gives me is it actually gives me the chance to do a differential of what was my script before and what it is now by accepting what is incoming from that apply button that I hit. We'll hit the tab button to accept. And it looks like it brought stuff into the window. Great. Let's take a look at the script itself. Only checks and creates staging and fact tables. It does not modify DBO invoices. Says it does some validation. Doing some validation behind the scenes is usually pretty good. What did you give us? I didn't tell it to create the schema. It's giving a check to make sure that the schema exists. And then it's checking if the stage invoices table exists as well. And if it does not exist, then we're going to create the table. Invoice ID. We've got some invoice number, invoice date, due date, customer ID, employee ID, customer key, employee key. Total amount, text amount, status. The formatting's a little bit all over the place, but if I take a look, let's see, invoice ID, invoice date, invoice amount. Oh no, total amount. All right, total amount is in here. Due date. Looks like for the most part everything is in here. It has some things in here for ETL bookkeeping, source load date. And defaults that to system UTC date time. And the load batch ID is null. Alright, and then we do the same thing for the fact table. Here we've got our surrogate key, identity, primary key, good there. Similar structure here, data was loaded, loaded batch ID, so it's assuming we're going to want to do some batching in the future. Table structures wise, it looks pretty good for what I asked it to do. Although admittedly about the only issue I have with it is let's take a look at the final employees table. And let's see what it gives us in terms of structure to the previous one. And here it kept the structure fairly consistent, but in ours, the structure changes a little bit. I don't know if I necessarily want to call that out as a major criticism because, I mean, if you're like me, I'm very picky about the order of things here, but maybe that's not your preference. If so, maybe you are okay with this. On the whole, for a prompt, not that bad. Let's go ahead and run this. Command completed successfully. Let's check our fact schema, which should have an invoice table. There it is, invoices. And we'll do the same thing for stage. And there's invoices as well. All right, we've got our tables. Now, with my tables created, let's create the stored procedure. I'll do another prompt that, again, I've engineered quite a bit. And I'm going to run this one too, and then we'll talk about it. If I sit here and... Wait a minute. What is going on here? One important thing that I want to call out here, and I've actually seen this a couple of times as well, apparently this is known and being addressed right now, but sometimes when you're trying to prompt the Copilot, to perform operations. For whatever reason, it seems like it is... For whatever reason, it seems to determine that the response that it gave did not work, and because of that, it actually is trying to accomplish it multiple times. Because it's trying to accomplish it multiple times, that prompt is still running, and it's been about a good 5 minutes since I initially ran the prompt. And you can see here, it gives multiple variations of what is expected out of this result. Almost like it gets stuck in an infinite loop here. Let's see if we can diagnose what's going on here. If this does happen, as far as I've seen, it will keep going for quite some time before it finally does anything. To save processing tokens and such, you can hit the stop button down here to cancel. And that should hopefully kill the process. Now we're going to try and create the stored procedure. To do that, I'm going to do another prompt that I've pre-prepared. So we'll put it in the window, we'll kick it off, and then I'll explain what's going on. Prompt looks like this. Get back there. Prompt looks like this. Take a look at a particular stored procedure in my database as the pattern stored procedure. I'm giving it an alias that loads data from DBO employees to stage employees and then into DIM employees. Same pattern I had in the previous prompt. Using the same pattern, create a new stored procedure that loads data from DBO invoices into stage invoices and into fact invoices. Fact invoices is a fact table, so any logic that implements SCD type 2 can be removed. The pattern stored procedure replaces the natural ID in the source table and replaces it with a surrogate key using a subquery lookup. Do the same in the procedure you generate if you find any columns that have foreign key relationships. And when defining the subquery, check if the dimension table is being looked up to has properties suggesting that it's slowly changing dimension type 2. So we're looking for effective start date, effective end date, and make sure to look for the correct version of the dimension record using invoice date. Also, do not insert values into identity columns. Let's see what it gives us for a response. Alright, I think when I initially prompted it, it got hung up on a point where it was supposed to ask me for credentials into the database, and I couldn't get that to work. There we go. There's the chance to authenticate. Should start doing its thing. Let's roll forward. Prompt finished. Let's take a look at the results. I'm going to go ahead and just apply this into our window here. We'll hit tab to accept the results. Let's take a look at our procedure. So ideally this is based on a pattern where we are trying to replicate the same experience again and again. Let's see what it did, knowing at least the previous status of our pattern. If you want to know more about that, take a look at the other videos I've done with the older SSMS Copilot. You'll see how I went through the process of designing and initially trying to replicate the pattern from there. Here we've got a batch ID, we can truncate the table, then we can insert into the staging table. And we've got a select top from customers here. This is where it's doing the foreign key lookup. And this is pretty close to what I was able to get previously in terms of the other tables, so that looks good. Customer ID is taking into account the effective date being defined. Does the same thing for customer key and employee key. Loads things here. Interesting that it generates a batch ID, that it doesn't actually put it into here. Minor detail, but not necessarily a major one. And then finally inserting into the final fact table from stage invoices. And here we've got stage ETL run log where it's trying to load into our batch table and says that it's completed. So the pattern looks good. It looks like it did the same thing that I wanted it to do earlier, other than the fact that it still holds to the same issue that has existed previously, which is it can't handle the merge statement. Let's see if we can get this one to fix that. Incremental processing. We didn't talk about that. That was a consistent problem we had with the last one. So let's see if we can add in the appropriate logic to allow for incremental processing triggering off of last modified date. And then we also want to fix... What was the other thing that we wanted to fix? We also want to make sure it accounts for both inserts and updates for the final table. So also adjust the portion that inserts into the fact table so that, assuming that we want to insert new records and update existing records. Let's see what it does for a response here. Might need to do another time roll here. Notice here that significantly compared to the OpenAI solution, GitHub Copilot takes a bit more time. I think that's because GitHub Copilot is checking more of the state of the database than Azure OpenAI was, but Azure OpenAI was able to check the environment as well. I imagine behind the scenes how they're implementing RAG is a little bit different for both of those because of that. This experience overall might differ a little bit. Process finished. Let's take a look at the new version of our procedure. We'll hit apply. And now, with this experience, we'll be able to get a differential of what has changed. It's detecting that now it should be an alter, which the stored procedure does not exist yet. Let's double check though. Yeah, it does not exist yet, so we don't want that one. So let's discard that. Checking the before and after is a little bit hard to do as a singular screen. I like doing my differentials side by side. I think this is okay. Yep, we're adding in a variable. And we're checking specifically when the status equals completed. So we're trying to identify the last time that the process ran. Okay, we'll say that's good there. Changing the terminology there a little bit. I don't think that's a major issue on the comments, so we'll accept that. Employee key does the same. And here's where it's making the adjustment to check for the is modified date greater than or equal to last run end time. And actually, it's nice to see. Notice that it is checking for modified date, and if it's null, it's actually bringing in created date as well. Not something I told it to do, but a very good check to make on the off chance that we want to check for records the last time it was updated, or if it hasn't been updated when the record was created. So that's a good catch there. Alright, and there we've got this changing into a merge statement. Let's just go ahead and accept that. Let's take a look at the whole process. Creating variables. We populate the last run end time for incremental processing. And we set it to a default of 1900 if it fails. If we keep track of that within the ETL run log, that'll be great. So we'll have to make sure it does that, but if it does that, then we should be good to go here. Alright, then we do truncate, we still do the insert, we still do the lookups before as we were doing them. And now we're changing into a merge statement. Merge statement here, checking on invoice ID to invoice ID looks good when matched. And if these fields differ for any reason, then we update. If not matched, then we insert. Good, it caught that. Sets into a status of completed here. And again, this really belongs further up. But that's the way that our pattern works, and it's actually choosing to follow our pattern. Good, I like that. So give any more suggestions. Can you provide a script and number to log the number of records processed during ETL run for the invoices table? Do I have any place in my staging table that allows for that? No. For right now, we'll call that good. Hit OK. Let's go ahead and execute this. Completed successfully. And let's check the fact table. Process did not complete. But we did do try catch, so that should have generated an error. Let's take a look at our error. Did nothing. Alright. Let's try and run what we want to do as far as the try. We're going to move this up here, though. Make it a little bit easier to do. Ah, the log file is out of sync. One moment. Alright, I had to wipe out some bad data in the environment, but once I did that, I was able to take the stored procedure, I was able to run it successfully, and with that, invoice data is populated successfully. Yay! At least yay is mostly what I want to say because of the edited version here. But to be honest, I wanted to share that so far, the experiences with SSMS Copilot's the GitHub version seems like it's pretty decent, but compared to working with the OpenAI version, there's a lot more variance available. Let me give you an example where with similar prompting, I tried to generate the procedure here as well. And on the one hand, it was very successful in that it was very successful in creating a stored procedure that worked really well, had a lot of good sophistication in there as far as checking if tables exist, and if so, processing it. and innately handling things like merge statements and whatnot. And it did very well with it, with only one problem. It didn't actually follow my pattern. Granted, there is a difference here I should call out. What was generated here was where I told the Copilot I want to create the procedure. I didn't tell it to create the procedure. I only told it to create the tables. But because I said I wanted to create the stored procedure, it tried creating it for me. And this was the version that it came up with, which in a number of ways, there was a lot of sophisticated capabilities that came in to this check here without me having to specify anything, but it doesn't follow my pattern, which is more what I want to do. I want it to follow a consistent pattern. What seems to resolve that was writing the prompt to say specifically follow my pattern, defining what your pattern is, and making sure it follows that. So in that case, it worked out fairly well. Something to keep an eye on. Another thing to keep an eye on, and this is something that the product team is actively working on, every now and then you will try and present it with a prompt, and it looks like it's going to be fine, but then it just tries to perform the operation, and then tries to do it again, and then again, and it just keeps going. Even if it gives you an answer that you would consider successful, for some reason it doesn't, up until the point that it either crashes SSMS, or in worst case, it has crashed my laptop, so just be aware of that. That's right, Sinister. Bad things happen. Yeah, no, it does. It's still a preview feature. That's okay, though. So what have we learned here? Well, we've learned that the GitHub Copilot extension into SSMS gives us a similar experience to what the previous version with OpenAI was able to give us, but with a couple of differences. The UI is a little bit different, the response is a little bit slower right now, that'll hopefully speed up as time goes on. But in some ways, GitHub Copilot is able to be more flexible and is able to give us more significant variations, and in some ways, encourage us to do practices that are pretty top quality even when we don't ask it to. The one thing we do have to keep an eye out for is something like this is about pattern replication, which means you want to stick to the pattern. And in some cases, what I've tested with GitHub Copilot is that it's a little bit more creative, and so that means sometimes, for reasons that I still need to investigate, it goes and it figures out something that I didn't think was possible, and it figured out how to do it on its own, which is great, but it didn't follow pattern in doing it. Hopefully that'll be something that improves as time goes on. Brings us to the end of today's video. Thank you for watching, and hopefully this gives you some insight into what the GitHub Copilot experience will be like in SSMS. If you like it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. And if you do have any other questions or scenarios you want me to test with a Copilot type experience, let me know in the comments. I'll do my best to answer those questions in future videos. For now, I'm DataBard, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Today's chapter may be done, but that doesn't mean the story is over. If you are looking to work with someone like me to improve your data strategy or implementation, go to bakertilly.com/digital, fill out the contact form, and let's see how we can help you take the next step on your data journey.